Hello friends, welcome back to Dungeon Design in Zelda. This is an ongoing series, so if you haven't seen the previous ones yet, feel free to click the little card above and catch up for some context, but otherwise, let's hop into things. So far, on our quest to temper our sword in the 3 sacred flames, we have already found Farore's flame in the ancient cistern and Nehru's flame aboard the sand ship. 1 flame is left to find, and based on how we found the previous 2 in extended areas off of the provinces that we've already visited, well, you can probably guess where the final flame is. But first things first, just like before, we have some things to do before we get to the dungeon. We can return to the Isle of Songs and learn a new song once more, then head down to Elden Volcano and complete the 3rd Silent Realm trial. The Silent Realm. Oh yes. Doing so will reward us with the Fire Shield earrings, which prevents taking damage from extreme heat, much in the same vein as the red tunic from Ocarina of Time. There's a tunnel near the summit of the volcano, which we can now safely pass through, and we'll run into our old pal Gorko the Goron. He's investigating these old ruins, but can't get past the fire barrier here. So what we can do is duck over to this spot just outside and fill a bottle with water, then pour it on this frog statue to quench his thirst, which dispels the fire barrier. Then do the same thing in the next room, except we have to pour the water down from this ledge up here. Simple enough. We'll finally reach the dungeon entrance, but this time the frog statue is much larger, and we'll need something bigger than one of our bottles to be able to extinguish the final barrier. So the game is just padding things out again. Fi will now let us douse for a suitable vessel, and we need something large enough to carry a lot of water in. If you haven't guessed it already, the item we're looking for is the water basin that we previously saw Faron taking a bath in. We can return to Faron province to ask her, and she'll allow us to borrow it. We'll have to call Scrapper to carry it for us. However, upon our descent back to Elden Volcano, Scrapper decides to be an absolute prick and flies down to the foot of the volcano instead. And then for some reason, he can't just fly back up and descend back to the correct location. He's just like, nah dude, we're doing this the hard way. So what we have now is an escort mission. We have to guide Scrapper all the way up from the foot of the volcano over to the summit, and all the while defend him from enemies. A task which is made even more unbearable by the fact that he's just kind of a jerk about it the entire time, and he won't shut up. We also can't use any of the shortcuts that we've made for ourselves to get up the mountain either, such as this updraft. No, we have to go the long way. All the while, Scrapper's going to be complaining constantly, telling us to slow down and whining about monsters. Am I going to deal with them? Scrapper, what does it look like I'm doing? Eventually, we'll make it back up the mountain, and he'll dump the water onto the frog statue, which removes that final barrier, much to Gorko's excitement. So, some thoughts about this section of the game. When comparing it to the previous pre-dungeon sections, I feel like it falls somewhere in the middle for me. There's certainly less to do here than the previous 2 dungeons, and it's not as egregious as the stuff before the ancient cistern, but it's also not as fun as the stuff before the sand ship. The escort mission is just an annoyance, but it thankfully doesn't last too long. Otherwise, there's no boss fight or mini dungeon to do here, just that Silent Realm trial and this little fetch quest turned escort mission. But still, I just don't have nearly as good a time as I do during the lead up to the sand ship. Oh well. With all that annoyance out of the way, let's head into the dungeon. We've reached the penultimate dungeon, the Fire Sanctuary, home of the last sacred flame. I haven't exactly kept it secret that the previous two dungeons were my two favorites in the game, and while there is a lot of good stuff going on in the Fire Sanctuary, in my eyes it fails at being a distinct and memorable dungeon, and there's one key reason for this. So far in Skyward Sword, or even in any other Zelda game, when retreading areas or exploring dungeons that repeat the same theme, the designers have ensured that they adhere to these themes while still making them distinct from each other. In Ocarina of Time, you have 3 pairs of dungeons that technically share their themes, but they all manage to be diverse and memorable. I don't think anybody gets dungeons like Inside the Deku Tree and the Forest Temple mixed up with each other. The same could be said about Dodongo's Cavern and the Fire Temple, or Jabu Jabu's Belly and the Water Temple. Typically, these have been contrasted with one being a more naturalistic environment, while the other being an artificial or constructed one. Both of these are technically water dungeons, but they're different takes on the water theme, so it doesn't feel redundant. Skyward Sword takes a only slightly different approach here. The two dungeons in the Faron region are Skyview Temple and the Ancient Cistern. Between the two, Skyview leans more into the forest theme, but only barely. The Ancient Cistern tosses the forest theme out in favor of this brilliant blend of light, dark, and water themes. No overlap. The two dungeons in Lanayru Desert are the underground mining facility and the sand ship. Neither are really desert themed per se, but both have these time shift stones. Even still, the first is a factory and the other is a pirate ship, so despite sharing some mechanics, they're very distinct from each other. The two dungeons in the Eldin region are the lava-filled Earth Temple, which may as well just be a fire dungeon, right? And this one, the Fire Sanctuary. You see what I'm getting at here, right? There's a lot of gameplay mechanics to set these two dungeons apart, and architecture-wise, the Fire Sanctuary has a lot more open-air environments, such as these balconies, while the Earth Temple is entirely underground. But we shouldn't have to get into the finer details to try and pick apart what differentiates these two dungeons. The truth is, even among Zelda fans, I constantly see people get these two dungeons confused, and it's not hard to see why. More so than any of the other dungeons so far, this one feels like a retread, even though it's not. That aside, while playing through the Fire Sanctuary, it's actually a really fun dungeon. There's some returning mechanics from other games, such as these water droplets to create platforms in the lava, which is pulled right out of the Wind Waker, but even these returning ideas get their own twist. The Fire Sanctuary also happens to be the longest dungeon in the game, which makes sense considering we're nearing the end of the game itself, so having this be the longest and most challenging dungeon just feels right. This dungeon also puts a twist on the central room idea. Every other dungeon in Skyward Sword so far has had a pretty open central room, leading to some interesting navigational challenges. The Fire Sanctuary doesn't really. The closest thing to a central room is this open canyon, which these balconies cross over. They're all connected in a way. This is all one zone loaded in at once, and the entire dungeon is connected through the series of bridges, balconies, and walkways. However, these balconies are all closed off from each other. You can't emerge into this area and walk all the way to the other end. You have to go through each section in a linear fashion. This isn't a bad thing, by the way, just different from what every other dungeon has done. Because of this, the dungeon feels like a long and twisted linear path, and while parts of the dungeon do crisscross or loop back in on itself, it still feels more like a gauntlet of challenges. In a way, this brings Ocarina of Time's Fire Temple to mind, though it's not quite the same. The architecture here shares a lot of similarities with the Earth Temple, particularly with its color palette, but it loses a lot of the dragon motifs in exchange for these depictions of the sun, which can be found in the mosaic-like floor tiles, as well as on many of the doors and even as sculptures. The Earth Temple also had a lot of animal-themed imagery going on, and there is plenty of that here too, but not all the same animals. Sorry, weird third eye monkey, but you're gone. We've got some strange lion heads and a lot of these frog statues, but most noteworthy, there's a lot of images of birds. Lots of different kinds of birds. We've got these owls, we've got sparrows. I think these ones might even be loftwings, but it's a bit hard to tell. So we've got a temple that's largely open air with depictions of birds and the sun. They could have leaned further in this direction and made this a sky temple, and that would have set it further apart from the earth temple, but oh well. It is interesting comparing these dungeons, how they made the overall aesthetics so similar, but didn't really reuse a lot of assets. At first I thought the door pattern and frames were the same, but even those, while similar, are not exactly the same. So it's even more confusing to me. It's not a case of them rushing and just reusing stuff. Except for those weird torches, they're here too, and I still think they look out of place. But otherwise, they took their time to make all of these things, but deliberately chose to make them similar to the Earth Temple. Despite those similarities, there's a lot of cool architectural stuff going on here. Out in the open canyon section, there are these huge pillars which look like flames reaching up into the sky, which by the way are visible in the distance from this part of the mountain outside the dungeon. Also, the fencing along these balconies have these neat flame shapes and the little tips at the top of the fencing that make it look like they're lined with candles. They're not actually, but especially from a distance, it's a cool little illusion. Of note as well is that the fire sanctuary has a lot more green. There's overgrowth taking over some of the more ruined rooms, and even massive tree roots and branches. These are mostly just to tie in the water fruit, but they do add a nice splash of color to some of these rooms. So I have mixed feelings here. I really think the visual design of this place is solid, but I still wish it were more distinct from the Earth Temple. I find the music here to be kind of a weak point for this dungeon. I've liked almost all of the dungeon themes in this game and felt like they've been a good fit for their dungeons, but this one just falls short for me. It's not bad per se, I don't find it irritating like I did Lanayru Mining Facilities theme, but it's just sort of boring. It lacks the energy of the Earth Temple's theme, the ethereal ambience of the Ancient Cistern, the tense danger of Skyview, and the melancholic mystery of the Sand Ship. It doesn't really strike any emotion for me. It's just sort of there. I don't hate it, I just find it largely forgettable. Like, it doesn't really achieve anything. It's too bad because Skyward Sword overall has some really wonderful music. In fact, the music of the volcano summit just outside of the dungeon is a pretty tense piece. They honestly could have swapped those two tracks around, and it may have worked better that way. One last point I want to touch on is the Mogmas. We saw a lot of those guys during our visit to the Earth Temple, and they're back here, but even worse. They're constantly interrupting the gameplay, and sometimes I swear they just don't shut up. We have to rescue some of them in the dungeon, and I'm not opposed to that idea. After all, previous games have had us do just that and it not be a nuisance, but usually it's either a quick blurb and we move on, or they don't talk at all. These Mogmas though, oh, they just love to talk. Good God, they just love to talk. Oh God, stop talking. Alright, let's look at the progression now. We once more have a foyer room here at the dungeon entrance. Right away we'll encounter this gap in the path, which we can cross by using either the slingshot or the claw shots to hit these water fruit, which creates this platform. We can cross the lava and we'll encounter another gap. We can use this same method to create another platform here, but the door straight ahead of us is locked, and this time the lava is flowing like a river. So instead of just crossing the gap, we can actually ride the platform downstream. While riding, you can pick off these archer bokoblins with your bow, and then we'll reach the end of the river. We can hop off onto this walkway and take the stairs, and we'll find one more bokoblin to fight. Once all the enemies are defeated, this gate will open, revealing this chest which contains the key we need for that locked door. Alright, so far we're only one room in, and this dungeon has already taught us a new mechanic. First in this controlled setting, creating this platform, then adding to it with the flow of lava, and then sprinkling enemies into the mix. It's good stuff. Before we can head through the door, we'll be interrupted by this Mogma. Already? Okay, why already? Wow! Stop talking! His name is Guld, and he's apparently the Mogma leader. He tells us a riddle about the dungeon, which will be important for later. It goes, look for the two statues that face one another, and jump into the mouth of the sleeping statues. Spending that key takes us into the first section of the open canyon area, which I guess is the closest thing this dungeon has to a central room. We can already see the boss door at the other end of the dungeon from here, but there will be a lot to do before we can get there. Alright, there's only one path to take, so we can head down the hall to the right here, fight these Keesim bokoblins, then head through the door. We'll be in this branching hallway here. To the left is an optional chest with some cash, and to the right we'll be brought into this round room. There's a new enemy type here called a Mogmas, which we actually can't defeat just yet. However, we can stand on this platform and he'll rise up from beneath us, giving us a boost up to this ledge. The path here loops around and brings us to this balcony where we can head through the next door. We'll be back outside in the open canyon room, and the bridge here will serve as an arena where we'll have to battle this dark variant of a Lizalfos. The method for fighting him is the same as the regular Lizalfos, but just watch out for his cursed breath attack, which will disable your weapons briefly. Once he's defeated, we can cross the bridge and head through the next door. This next room has some spooms and bokoblins, all of which you can snipe with your bow to defeat. This room has a pretty straightforward puzzle. The lava isn't flowing here, so we'll want to use the beetle to fly through the tunnels at the top of the room and grab a bomb flower. By the way, this is all hinted to you by the rupees, highlighting where these tunnels are. Then you can use the bomb to strike this statue, which releases the flow of lava. Now we can use the water fruit to create a platform and ride over to the other end of the room. We'll find two doors here, but one is locked, so we'll head into the other one. Here we'll find this Mogma named Silva, who was captured and is currently dangling over some lava. Unfortunately, there isn't much we can do to help him right now, so once he's done whining, we can explore the room. There's these sort of molten puddles on the floor, which we can cool and remove with the gust bellows, and we'll find a treasure chest here with a small key. As a side note, I really like that they placed these sand piles here to sort of hint to us to try out the gust bellows. It's a neat way for the game to show us that we can use it to cool these puddles without it outright telling us. Now that we have that key, we can head back into the previous room and go through that locked door. This room is something of a winding one, which has a lot of water fruit and overgrown grass, as well as some dig spots where we can find some rupees. The doorway through is blocked with flames, with a frog statue above it, just like the ones at the dungeon entrance. What we'll want to do is head up these stairs in this room, over to this balcony section, and use one of these water fruits, which we can toss with our sword, and it should land on the frog and extinguish the flames. While we are up here, there's another optional chest here, as well as one downstairs with some cash. Now we can head down the hallway we just opened, fight some more bokoblins, and head into the next room. This room is another Mogmanos room, very similar to the one we were already in, but we can actually fight them this time. We can again stand on this platform to reach this ledge, grab a water fruit, then splash them to momentarily stun them, then strike them repeatedly to break them apart, which defeats them. Do this for both, and the lava will drain out of the room. Actually, based on the music here and the locked doors, I guess you could consider this the dungeon's mid-boss, right? Turns out this room is actually adjoining to the room that Silva was held captive in, just separated by this fencing. And so the lava has drained out from under him as well. There's a door here we can go through to return to that room, and we can pull this lever to release him. He'll talk a bunch, but as thanks for freeing him, he'll reward us with the dungeon item, the Mogma mitts. The Mogma mitts are basically an upgrade to the digging mitts that we already have, but instead of just digging in these dig spots, we can now burrow underground and go through these underground tunnels. They're a neat concept, but if I'm being honest, I just don't find these underground sections very fun. They're just kind of slow and cumbersome, but it does open up some passageways that we couldn't take before. There's a spot to dig into right in this room, which actually takes us into the section below the adjoining room. We'll find a locked door here and a gated off hallway, but if we dig underground, there's a button to press here, which opens that gate up. Now we can head through the hallway, out the door, and we'll be out in this section of the open canyon. If you hang a right, you'll actually be able to press the switch to make a shortcut to the previous walkway where we fought that Dark Lizalfos. But otherwise, if we cross this walkway, we'll have to face off against a handful of bokoblins goblin archers. The path here is crumbled, but you can cross using the claw shots and head through the next door. Here we'll find another captured Mogma, this one named Bronzy. There's a little bit of a puzzle in this room with these gates, but we can open them up by digging underground and hitting these buttons. Just make sure to open the left one first so that the way back isn't blocked off. Now we can head down this path, grab the water fruit, toss it at this frog statue, and extinguish the flames. In this side room is a lever which we can pull to free Bronzy over here, who has some confusing dialogue. First he says he'll help you by giving you information, then he says he won't help you, but then he decides to help you anyways, and then he sees Silva and just leaves. Alright then, either way, we'll be rewarded here with the dungeon map. Both Bronzy and Silva's dialogue here hint that there's a secret room somewhere behind a false wall. We can use the map here to see this secret room and which wall to bomb. Easy enough. Then we can dig through this tunnel, encounter a Moldorm, who you can defeat by striking his tail, and will emerge in another room. There's a treasure chest here with a key, and we can climb up these vines and we'll be looped back to the previous room. We'll need to backtrack now to that locked door that we saw earlier, and we'll emerge at the far northwestern section of the canyon. There's a lava river here, so we can use this water fruit to cross, head up these stairs here, and through the door. If we head down the hallway, we'll come to a gate, which we'll need to dig under to open. But then there's this little prick of a Mogma named Platz, who shuts the gate, mistaking us for a monster. And instead of just explaining to him in words that we're not a monster, we have to chase him. Yeah, that's gonna make him less scared of us. Once we catch him, he'll realize that we're not a monster and open the gate for us. He also leaves us this treasure chest with a heart piece. Feels kind of weird to just have it given to us like this, but okay. Now we can use this water fruit to make a platform and cross over to this balcony here. There's a switch which opens a shortcut back for us, and another underground section where we use this bomb to destroy this rock and open the flow of lava. Wait, open the flow of lava? Of course, with the lava now flowing towards us, this triggers an escape sequence. It's a short sequence, and you just have to sort of sprint crawl out. Just don't bother going for that stamina fruit, and you'll be just fine. Now that the lava is flowing, we can use the water fruit to make another platform and ride it down the river here. We'll shore up on the next walkway and head up the stairs, and we'll actually make it to the boss door. However, we don't have the boss key yet. So this walkway here splits into 4 directions. The western way is where we just entered from, the northern one has the boss door, and the eastern one just leads to this gate. So it's a dead end. So the only way to go is south. There is a stone tablet here which labels this as the Bridge of Decision, but otherwise this southern one seems to be a dead end also. However, you may notice that as you approach the end of the bridge, the camera automatically shifts to look downwards. This is where the riddle from the start of the dungeon comes into play. There's these 2 statues at the bottom of the canyon, and the riddle said to jump into the mouth of the sleeping statue. So just go ahead and jump off the bridge, and aim for the statue that has its eyes closed. It's something of a leap of faith, but as we approach the bottom, a platform will actually materialize for us to land on. It's a pretty cool moment. Maybe just try to stick the landing better than I did. There's a short hallway here, and then we'll end up locked in this room where we'll have to face off against 2 dark Lizalfos. But these guys aren't too hard. Just use the same battle tactics as any previous Lizalfos encounters, and you'll be alright. Once they're defeated, the doors will unlock, and we can move on. Next, we'll have to trek up this long, winding spiral staircase. There is an alcove in this room with an optional chest, but otherwise we can just head for the top. Most of the gaps in the staircase can be jumped across, but there is one here that you'll need to use the claw shots for. Once we're at the top of the stairs, we can head through the door and we'll be in this dark room, which has the chest with the boss key. However, it's behind some bars, so there's a pretty simple puzzle here. We can burrow under the room, and while underground, there are these buttons to press which light these torches. As hinted at by this stone tablet, you just have to light the torches in the order of the amount of wings that each statue has. So 1, 2, 3, 4, survive. This will open the gate blocking the chest, but will also release this Moldorm, so we'll have to fight him too. Just hit his tail a few times to defeat him. If he's moving too quickly for you, you can trick him into charging at you, and then when he hits a wall, he'll be momentarily stunned, giving you an opening to attack. Once he's defeated, we can head out and open this chest to receive the mysterious crystals. Okay, were you guys just running out of ideas for boss keys at this point? The door here will actually loop us back to the boss door. We just have to open this gate and then walk back over there. As usual, there's the 3D rotating puzzle, and then we can head into the boss room. One final thing to mention, anytime after getting the Mogma mitts, you can actually backtrack over to this room and kill that first Mogmanos that we encountered. Doing so will open a path so we can find this optional chest which actually has an empty bottle. Bottles are pretty valuable items in Zelda, but I didn't mention it before because I almost always forget to go back for it. They placed it in such an awkward spot, it's located right here, that you either have to go back in after finishing the dungeon or just awkwardly backtrack there. It's not the worst thing in the world, but still pretty out of the way. Anyways, with all of that done, let's head into the boss room. Guess who it is? Our old pal Girahim. He's surprised to see us alive, but remarks it's no coincidence. We're bound by fate. But Girahim wants to chat for a bit before we fight. He points out the drawings on the walls in this room, which show both gates of time. The one Impa destroyed in Lanayru Desert, and the one we need to activate in the sealed grounds. This has put him in a better mood, since a second gate will allow him the opportunity to find Zelda. So Girahim extends an offer to us. He says he'll spare our lives if we tell him where he can find the second gate of time. Link naturally refuses, so Girahim decides he wants to do the whole murder thing after all, but not before showing off his, supple skin. Okay, so the boss fight this time is a rematch against Girahim, who we previously battled in Skyview Temple. I have to say for the record that Girahim is freaking nuts, and I love every moment that he's on screen. His dialogue is the perfect combination of charming and sadistic, and the way he licks his sword after landing a hit on you is just so creepy in the right way. He just takes so much pleasure in violence without being some mindless beast, which makes him such a perfect villain. The fight is a lot like the previous one back in Skyview, but with some added challenge. During the first phase, he'll again try to catch your sword, so you'll want to psych him out by holding your sword in one direction, then actually striking from the opposite way. He'll summon these floating daggers to protect himself, which appear to be Japanese kunai. And oops, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. But as long as they're not in the path of your sword swings, then you'll be able to land your hits on him just fine. If he sends those kunai flying at you, you can deflect them back at him. After dealing enough damage, he'll draw a pair of sabers to duel you properly. In this phase, he'll employ a variety of attacks against you, including launching waves of kunai, which you can deflect with your sword, or he'll just attack you with his sword straight on, which can be countered with a well-timed shield parry. Like the previous Stalfos battles that we've done, he'll guard in two directions, leaving a side open to attack. Easy enough. He'll also do an attack in which he'll teleport into the air and slam down at you from above, but as long as you do a flip back out of the way as soon as he teleports, you should be able to avoid this just fine and strike back. He's just so much fun to fight. The one-on-one sword duel just feels like it was meant for Zelda, and Girahim is just so satisfying to land hits on. Most enemies just have this sort of bludgeoning sound, but landing a hit on Girahim has this particular feel to it that's unlike any other enemies in the game. And considering the repeated encounters with Girahim throughout the game, it just makes it more personal. Keep at him enough, and he'll withdraw from the battle out of frustration. Well, maybe frustration's not the right word. He'll be pretty furious. So in a way, this is the equivalent of the dungeon boss rage quitting the battle. He'll teleport away, and as usual, we'll get our heart container. Then find the final sacred flame. Din's Flame. Now that we have bathed our blade in all 3 sacred flames, it reveals its true form. Congratulations. We forged the Master Sword itself. So that's the dungeon. Overall, I think my memory has been too hard on the Fire Sanctuary. The dungeon actually does a lot of fun stuff. The architecture is really wonderful, fighting Girahim is always a treat, and the dungeon really feels like a shakeup in terms of how you progress through it, giving us a more gauntlet-style approach rather than the big central room-based progression structure that the game has used up until now. There's genuinely a lot of fun moments, but ultimately it still falls short. It's preceded by 2 totally amazing dungeons, and while many of the dungeon aspects here are good, most of them don't quite feel amazing. Aside from some of the architecture and that boss fight, most of the dungeon feels pretty forgettable because it fails to stand out. There are some other gripes I have as well. For starters, this riddle sounds pretty cool, but is ultimately pretty inconsequential. It's told to us at the start of the dungeon, but even if you forget all of that, you could just take a leap of faith, and there's a 50-50 chance you'll be right. You could have replaced this whole conversation with a stone tablet somewhere, and it wouldn't make a difference. Which brings me to my next complaint, the Mogmas. I'm not opposed to the idea of having NPCs in dungeons, or having to rescue NPCs in dungeons, or the idea of those NPCs giving you the map or the dungeon item, but did they have to make these guys so annoying? Those voice clips are like nails on a chalkboard to me. And the text here just goes on for too long in some of these encounters. Stop talking. But aside from those things, most of this dungeon is not a bad time. I wish it was more distinct and that it had better music, but in the end, it's far from a terrible dungeon. As bad as it sounds, the biggest thing to hold against it is that it just isn't as good as the other dungeons in the game. But I guess that doesn't mean it's bad either. Overall, while I didn't love it, I still enjoyed my time in the Fire Sanctuary. I think it's definitely a worthwhile dungeon, and while it could have done some things a little bit better, it still presents us with a pretty fun challenge before the end of the game. Thank you so much for watching this video, everybody. I just want to take a moment to say thank you to the lovely people who supported me here on Patreon. In particular, those who supported at the cheese tier or higher, which includes Tetra, Brenda, Justin, Callie, Finley, and Grey Mage. Thank you so much for the support, you guys, and I will catch you all next time. Bye-bye.